Amidst the roaring storm, the German Shepherd named Ghost suddenly growled, snapped his leash, and bolted straight into the darkening forest. Despite his two 10-year-old owners calling his name in panic, he refused to turn back.
We're coming!
They were forced to follow, weaving through trees that writhed in the wind. The chase ended in a small clearing where Ghost was staring up, barking desperately at a massive tree branch. When the two girls followed his gaze, a horrifying sight froze the blood in their veins. A man was hanging upside down by his feet, his motionless body swaying in the torrential rain. To find out what the two brave girls and their dog did next, please support us by subscribing to the channel. Where in the world are you listening to this story from? The sky over Silver Creek, Oregon, had turned the color of a deep bruise. Rain fell not in drops but in solid, wind-driven sheets, hammering against the roofs of the small town and turning the forest floor into a slick mire of mud and fallen pine needles. It was the kind of storm that sent sensible people indoors and kept them there, huddled by fires with mugs of hot chocolate. But sense was a luxury not afforded to 10-year-old twins caught on the wrong side of the woods when the storm broke. Lily and Daisy, identical in their curtain of straight brown hair and wide hazel eyes, were anything but identical in spirit. Lily, the older by 7 minutes, walked with a focused intensity, her small shoulders squared against the wind as she tried to navigate the trail that was quickly dissolving into a stream. Daisy followed a step behind, her gaze darting nervously at the thrashing trees, her hand tightly gripping the leash of their dog. Between them, a bulwark against the storm's fury, was Ghost. He was a 4-year-old German Shepherd of striking appearance, his thick coat a rare blend of silver gray and stark white, giving him an ethereal, almost spectral look in the fading light. His temperament was a mirror of his protective instincts, a deep well of loyalty and calm intelligence that now seemed troubled. Ghost stopped abruptly, planting his powerful legs. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound deeper and more urgent than his usual warnings about squirrels or deer. He pulled against the leash, his intelligent eyes fixed on a part of the forest where the shadows were thickest. "Ghost, come on," Daisy pleaded, her voice nearly swallowed by a clap of thunder. But the dog ignored her. With a sharp tug, he pulled the leash from her grasp and bolted into the trees, his barks sharp and insistent. "Ghost!" Lily shouted, her usual caution overridden by a surge of panic for their dog. They plunged after him, off the trail and into the chaotic undergrowth, branches whipping at their faces. They followed the sound of his frantic barking, deeper and deeper into the forest's roaring heart. They found him in a small, unnatural clearing, circling the base of a massive Douglas fir. He would bark, then whine, looking back at the girls with an expression of desperate appeal. It was then that Lily's eyes followed his upward gaze. She saw something that did not belong. At first, it was just a shape, a dark mass dangling from a thick lower branch, swaying sickeningly in the wind. She thought it was a bundle of old clothes, a cruel prank perhaps. But then, a flash of lightning illuminated the scene, and the truth crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. It was not a bundle. It was a man, his body hanging upside down, suspended by a thick rope tied around his ankles. His clothes were soaked, and his head and arms dangled limply, lifelessly, just a few feet from the ground. A scream caught in Daisy's throat. Lily felt her blood run cold. The man was still, terrifyingly still, but Ghost's persistent whining told them otherwise. He was alive. "We have to get him down," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. The rope was too high, the knot a complex, ugly lump against the branch. As panic began to set in, Ghost acted. He stopped circling and ran to a smaller, gnarled root near the base of the tree. A secondary line of the same rope had been looped and pulled taut around it, acting as an anchor. Ghost clamped his powerful jaws around this section of the rope and pulled, digging his paws into the mud, his muscles straining. The main rope, high above, slackened by a precious few inches. It was the chance they needed. Lily scrambled forward, pulling her small multi-tool knife from her pocket, its blade tiny against the thick, wet rope. As Ghost held the tension, she sawed desperately, the fibers slowly, agonizingly giving way. The Silver Creek Community Hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet worry. In a room at the end of a long, sterile hallway, the man from the forest lay between crisp white sheets. The mud and grime had been washed away, revealing a man in his 40s. He was tall and lean, but with the underlying strength of someone who had once been powerful. His short brown hair was threaded with silver at the temples, and his face, even etched with pain and confusion, had a natural kindness to it. But his eyes, a startlingly clear blue, were vacant. They stared at the ceiling, seeing nothing of the present, haunted by a past he could not name. He had no identification, no memory of who he was, or how he came to be hanging from a tree in the middle of a storm. In the neat charts clipped to his door, he was simply John Doe. Sheriff Davis was the first official visitor. He was a man in his late 50s, broad-shouldered with a deeply lined face that spoke of long years keeping the peace in a small town. He stood by the bed, his voice gentle but firm, asking questions that met only with a wall of silent, terrified confusion. The man didn't know his name, his home, or his enemy. He was a ghost in his own life. The dynamic shifted when Sarah arrived with her daughters. Sarah was a woman whose exhaustion was worn like a second skin, her hands calloused from work and her posture slightly bent from carrying the weight of single motherhood alone. She hugged her girls tightly, her relief a fragile thing warring with the fear in her eyes. It was Lily who insisted. "Ghost has to see him. He'll know what to do." After a brief argument with a nurse, the German Shepherd was allowed in. Ghost walked directly to the bedside, ignoring the sheriff and Sarah completely. He sat, laid his great head on the edge of the mattress, and let out a soft, low whine. For the first time, a flicker of life appeared in the man's blue eyes. His hand, trembling slightly, moved from the sheets and rested on Ghost's head, his fingers tangling in the thick, silver-white fur. A single tear traced a path down his temple. In that moment, the dog was not just a dog. He was an anchor, the only solid thing in a sea of terrifying emptiness. The story of the rescue was too compelling to stay quiet for long. A local reporter, a young man eager for a human interest piece, wrote a moving article about the two brave 10-year-old girls and their heroic dog who saved a man's life. The story was on the front page of the Silver Creek Chronicle the next morning. It was meant to inspire the community, and it did. Phone calls flooded the sheriff's office with offers of help, but echoes travel in all directions. In a secluded house high in the hills overlooking the town, another man read the same story. His face, unlike the one in the hospital bed, was not kind. It hardened as he read the details, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the newspaper. He picked up his phone, his voice a low snarl. "There's a problem. He's alive." A week passed. The man in the hospital was physically healing, but his mind remained a locked room. Sarah, feeling a strange sense of duty to this man her children had saved, decided they all needed some fresh air. The sun was finally out, casting long shadows through the damp Oregon forest. She took the girls and Ghost for a walk along a trail that skirted the woods, a safe distance from where the nightmare had unfolded. But safety is a matter of perspective. Ghost, who had been walking calmly beside them, suddenly froze. His nose twitched, lifting high into the air as he sampled a scent no human could detect. It was a scent of memory and metal and fear. With a low whine, he pulled hard, dragging Lily and Daisy off the path and into the dense trees, his purpose absolute. He led them with an unnerving certainty, navigating the undergrowth as if following an invisible map. Their trek ended at a place they had never seen before, a dilapidated cabin, its roof sagging and its windows like vacant eyes. The air around it was heavy and still. Ghost didn't hesitate. He ran straight to the crumbling porch, squeezed beneath it where a section of floorboards had rotted away, and began to dig. He clawed at the damp earth with a desperate, focused frenzy, dirt flying behind him. Sarah and the girls could only watch, a mix of fear and awe holding them silent. A moment later, he backed out, dragging a small, rust-eaten metal box. With trembling hands, Lily lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like dry leaves, lay two items. The first was a single military dog tag, tarnished with age. Lily wiped the grime away and read the name stamped into the metal: Arthur Vance. The second was a faded photograph of two men in army fatigues standing in a desert landscape, their arms slung around each other's shoulders. One of them was unmistakably a younger version of the man in the hospital. The other was a stranger. They took the box directly to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Davis laid the contents on his desk under the harsh fluorescent light. "Arthur Vance," he said, a wave of relief in his voice. "Our John Doe has a name." He picked up the photograph, studying the two faces. "At least now we have a place to start." He showed the picture to the girls, who had been explaining Ghost's strange behavior. Ghost, sitting patiently by Lily's feet, leaned forward to look. The sheriff pointed to the stranger in the photo. "Any idea who this might be?" As his finger touched the man's smiling face, a low growl vibrated in Ghost's chest. It was deep and certain, a sound of pure distrust. Lily's head snapped toward her dog. "He doesn't like him," she said quietly. "He's growling at that man." Sheriff Davis stopped. He looked from the dog back to the photograph, a new, sharp glint in his eyes. The dog hadn't just found a clue, he had just given him one. Marcus Thorne stood before the panoramic window of his office, looking down on the sleepy town of Silver Creek as if it were his personal kingdom. He was a man who commanded respect, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than most people in town made in a month. His public face was one of civic pride and easy charm, a successful businessman who had invested heavily in the community. But behind his calm, handsome features, his eyes were as cold and hard as river stones. He was the other man in the photograph, and the news from Sheriff Davis's office, delivered through a well-placed source, had reached him like a death knell. It wasn't just that Arthur Vance was alive. That was a problem that could be managed. It was the box. The fact that the dog had found that specific box meant his entire world was balanced on a knife's edge. Inside that box, tucked beneath the photograph, was a ledger. It detailed a single, massively illegal transaction involving the dumping of chemical waste in the protected forest, a deal that had made him a fortune and poisoned a swath of land he had sworn to protect. Arthur, his old army buddy, had stumbled upon it by accident. Marcus had offered him a cut, but Arthur, with his rigid sense of honor, had refused. So Marcus had silenced him, or so he thought. Now, with the box in police hands, it was only a matter of time before they looked past the photo and found the real treasure. He could not allow that to happen. His empire, his reputation, his very freedom depended on it. He picked up his phone, his movements precise and devoid of panic. He dialed a number, and a low, gravelly voice answered on the first ring. "It's me," Marcus said, his tone flat. "The situation has become complicated. The box has been found." There was a pause on the other end. "What are your orders?" Marcus's gaze drifted to the edge of town, where a small curl of smoke rose from the chimney of an isolated house. The woman and her two girls, the ones from the paper. They live in the old Miller cabin by the woods. I need the box back. Go there tonight. Convince them to give it to you. Be persuasive, but leave no permanent marks. I want the box, not a murder investigation. A short time later, two men climbed into a nondescript black truck. They were large, unremarkable men, their faces blank and their shoulders thick with muscle, the kind of men who excelled at following orders without question. They knew the location well. A small, vulnerable house with only a woman, two children, and a dog inside. As dusk settled over Silver Creek, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, their truck turned off the main road and onto the quiet, unlit lane that led to Sarah's home. The shadows were gathering, converging on the small house, and the family inside had no idea that the danger they had discovered in the forest was now coming for them. Inside the small house, a fragile peace had settled. Sarah was mending a tear in Lily's jacket, and the girls were finishing their homework at the kitchen table, the only sounds the scratching of their pencils and the soft ticking of the clock. Ghost lay on the rug before the hearth, appearing to be asleep. But he was not. His sleep was a shallow pretense, his senses on high alert. Long before any human ear could detect it, he felt the low vibration of the approaching truck. His head lifted, a growl so low it was more a feeling than a sound rumbled in his chest, and the fur on his spine bristled. Lily saw it first and stopped writing. "What is it, Ghost?" The answer came a moment later. The crunch of gravel outside, heavy footsteps on the wooden porch, and then a hard, demanding knock on the door that rattled the whole frame. Sarah froze, her heart leaping into her throat. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by the terrifying splintering sound of the door jamb giving way. As the door swung open to reveal the silhouettes of two large men, Ghost exploded into action. He did not charge them. His intelligence was far too sharp for a futile attack. Instead, he spun around and nudged the petrified girls with his head, herding them urgently towards the deep pantry closet. "Go now," Sarah whispered, understanding his intent. She shoved them inside and closed the door, just as the men stepped into the living room. "We're just here for the box," one of the men said, his voice deceptively calm. "Give it to us, and we'll leave." To draw their attention completely away from the closet, Ghost launched himself at a tall floor lamp, sending it crashing to the ground with a shatter of glass and metal. The men spun towards the noise, startled. In that split second of confusion, Ghost bolted through the kitchen and out the back door, barking a loud, defiant challenge into the night. "Get that dog!" The second man snarled, annoyed by the racket. They took the bait. They abandoned their search and charged out into the backyard, chasing the flash of white and gray fur as it disappeared into the blackness of the woods. Ghost was faster, smarter, and on his own territory. He led them on a brilliant and frustrating chase, weaving through the dense trees, his barks echoing to guide their pursuit. He would let them get close enough to think they had him, then dart away into the shadows, always pulling them deeper into the forest and further from the house. Inside, Sarah's hands trembled so hard she could barely hold her phone. She dialed 911, her voice a choked whisper as she reported the intruders. The chase in the woods had bought her the most valuable thing in the world: time. Within minutes, a sound more beautiful than any music cut through the night. It was the distant wail of a siren, growing steadily louder. In the forest, the two men heard it too. They stopped, realizing they had been played. They were trapped, tricked by a dog, with the law bearing down on them. The flashing red and blue lights washed over the forest, turning the chaotic scene into a tableau of swift, quiet justice. Sheriff Davis had the two henchmen in handcuffs before they could formulate a lie. Ghost emerged from the trees, panting but unharmed, and trotted directly past the officers to nudge his head against Lily's hand, his duty done. Later that night, at the hospital, they recounted the terrifying events to Arthur Vance. As Lily described how Ghost had fearlessly lured the dangerous men away from them, something shifted behind Arthur's vacant blue eyes. The image of the loyal dog sacrificing himself for the children struck a deep, forgotten chord. It was like a key turning in a rusted lock. Memories, violent and sharp, flooded back. He remembered Marcus Thorne, his friend, his brother-in-arms. He remembered discovering the ledger, detailing the chemical dumping. He remembered the argument, the betrayal in Marcus's eyes, the brutal attack, and the feeling of being left to die in the cold, unforgiving forest. "Marcus," he whispered, his voice raspy with disuse and newfound pain. It was Marcus Thorne. With that, the final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. Arthur's full, lucid testimony was an unbreakable chain of evidence. The next morning, Sheriff Davis walked into Marcus Thorne's opulent office and arrested him in front of his panoramic window, the powerful man's mask of respectability finally shattered for all to see. 2 months later, the sun shone brightly on the town square of Silver Creek. The entire community had gathered for a ceremony. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude and pride. The mayor honored Lily and Daisy with a special citizenship award, But the biggest applause was for Ghost. The German Shepherd stood proudly as Sheriff Davis knelt and clipped a custom-made silver medal to his collar, engraved with the words, "The Hero of Silver Creek." Standing in the crowd was Arthur Vance. He looked like a different man, the haunted emptiness in his eyes replaced with a calm, steady light. He stepped forward and announced his plans to stay in Silver Creek. Inspired by the dog who had saved him in every way that mattered, he was using his life savings to open a center dedicated to training shelter dogs to become therapy companions for other veterans. That evening, the small house on the edge of the woods was filled with laughter. Arthur had become a permanent fixture in their lives, a grandfatherly presence who told the best stories and helped Sarah fix the leaky faucet. He was no longer a ghost, but a man who had found a new purpose and a new family. He watched as Lily and Daisy played with Ghost on the floor, the dog's silver medal gleaming in the warm light of the lamp. They had all been rescued that day in the storm, brought together by the courage of two small girls and the unwavering loyalty of one incredible dog, forming a circle of healing that was stronger than any shadow. Sometimes the most profound healing comes not from words, but from the silent, unwavering loyalty of a friend with four paws. The story of Ghost and Arthur reminds us that a single act of courage can ripple outwards, mending hearts we never knew were broken. If an animal has ever been your hero, we would be honored to read about your experience in the comments below, so we can all share in that light. By liking and sharing this video, you help these messages of hope reach others who may need them. Please consider subscribing to become part of our story-sharing family, and the journey does not have to end here. Another story of courage and compassion is waiting for you right on the screen now.